Everybody. Okay. Now, I'm very pleased to welcome to the panel Patrick Dunn. Patrick is an independent learning consultant with more than 30 years' experience. He specializes in learning design for new technologies, in particular blended learning design. He's also hugely creative, designing visuals, videos, and animations for the music business, as well as for the learning world. Welcome, Patrick.
Hi.
Good to have you here. And a very warm welcome back to the amazing Rachel Smith. Rachel cut her digital teeth as a solutions architect and senior developer. Since then, she's gone on to be a web services manager, a digital experience consultant, and currently heads up a team of UX designers. Rachel is the person that everyone wants on their project. Hi, Rachel. Good to have you with us.
Thank you very much for that lovely introduction, Sarah.
That's okay.
The 5 is in the post.
Finally, a very warm welcome to Geoff Elliott. Geoff is Learning and Technology Development Manager at Pembrokeshire College and a good friend to UFI. He's a member of the Welsh National Digital Learning Council and is an evangelist for digital learning in Wales. Over the years, Geoff has run a whole range of digital learning projects, including 2 very successful ones for UFI. Geoff knows about projects from the sharp end. Good to have you with us, Geoff.
Hello, all.
Hi. Well, let's just set the context. This challenge is all about helping some of the people who are least likely to engage with learning. We want to help them gain the confidence and motivation to increase their vocational skills. But if we're going to tackle the barriers that these learners face, that will mean ensuring that any solution works effectively for them. And that means getting the learning design right. During the pandemic, very large numbers of learners had to move suddenly from face-to-face learning to learning online. Zoom calls replaced the classroom. We saw an awful lot of PowerPoint and worksheets. It was an emergency measure, and not all of the learning produced in that time was great. But rather than dwell on the bad, let's focus on how we move on from there and how we get better. So my first question, which is to all panel members, which is, thinking about your own experience, what's the best and most effective piece of digital learning design that you've come across? Tell us what it was and why it worked. And that question goes to Patrick.
Hi, hello everyone. Hope you can hear me clearly. I have some very noisy neighbours just having a lovely picnic at the moment, so if that intervenes, forgive me. Okay, learning design is all about finding out through design thinking what works for your specific learners, okay? So that they're not the same at the end of the experience as they were at the start. That's one of my kind of mantras, and I may bore you this afternoon talking about that. So I'm going to give you 2 really different examples, as briefly as I can. One very low tech, one very high tech. Just imagine you're a junior legal specialist in a technical environment and you face complex inquiries, unpredictable challenges. You need to be trained to examine really carefully what the issues are. So in this particular project that I was involved in, we thought, okay, this is case study stuff, isn't it? We're going to do interactive case studies and we're going to give them little challenges. They've got to research. And so we went a little way down that path and we started researching it. And they said, do you know what? This is great. It's really funky and fun. But can you just make it simpler than that? Can you just give us performance support? Can you just give us links to a note-taking app? So we did this massive U-turn, right? And produced basically the most low-tech solution you could possibly imagine. It was a reference system to the resources they needed. It was a note-taking app linked to a reference site. Okay, super low-tech. Let's go to the other end of the spectrum, because I think that's brilliant design, by the way. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, you've just come out of prison. You want to work on a building site. You need to learn about health and safety. You've got literacy problems. You're probably fairly low educational level. How do you learn about health and safety on a building site? Well, UFI have just completed a project where we use really quite high-tech VR using consumer VR units. So that basically the learners wander around an environment, they don't have to read much, they encounter certain problems, they trip up, they fail horribly, but of course it's perfectly safe. And eventually they stumble over the right solutions and learn them. So I think these are fantastic examples where you're fitting the solution like a glove, like a tailor-made item of clothing to the learner. I think they're excellent examples of learning design. And yeah, I'll come back to my mantra, which is you need to look at how you're going to move your learners from a starting point to a desired endpoint. 2 examples.
That's great. Thank you very much, Patrick. That's really interesting. Geoff, do you want to tell us about your experience, about where you've come across really good learning design and why that worked?
Well, a bit like Patrick, I've got 2 examples as well, a high-tech one and a low-tech one. Several years ago, I was commissioned by Vocational Wales, Qualification Wales, to look at the use of technology in the assessment of vocational qualifications. So I had the opportunity to sort of research across the whole of the UK. And there are 2 examples which stand out. The first one is the high-tech solution, and I'm not a really big fan of VR because of the enormous cost of actually making it worthwhile. But there was a private learning provider in Bristol that did paint spraying apprenticeships and paint spraying training. And if you can imagine trying to get everybody into a paint spraying booth with all the kit on, and for the teacher with all the kit on, trying to explain to the learners exactly what you have to do is really challenging. So they had, alongside the paint booths, they also had a rig, and it's an industry standard rig with all the equipment for doing virtual paint spraying. So you had the proper paint spraying arm, and it was connected up to a whole screen of a whole set of screens, so all the class could see what that learner was doing. And I thought that was a great balance between having to sort of deal with the real world of trying to sort of show learners what to do and seeing what those learners are doing, having one alongside each other. But the cost of that VR development was enormous. It's a multi-million-pound project across the world. The other example is actually from my own college, and it's very, very simple, really, is that again, it's about assessment and about assessment feedback. And one of our media teachers simply does a screen recording of their feedback on web design, and then gives that to the learner. And it's such an easy way of actually, it's quicker for the teachers to be able to sort of just narrate their feedback on that video, on that web page, than there is to do copious notes on printed documents. And I've really sort of tried to sort of like champion that across the college, not just for media studies, but for all sorts of platforms. So those are my 2 examples. I'm just going to, if it's all right with you, Sarah, I'm just going to paste the link to the report in the chat, so people can go and look at these examples in a bit more detail.
No, that would be really, really useful, and I think it's really great to have the 2 examples of something which is really quite expensive and sophisticated, but also the low-tech stuff, and showing how both of those can be really effective. Rachel, what about your experience?
Okay, so I don't have a learning design background, but I do have a design background, and one of my recent I managed to get an hour of my time to do some training on a package called Figma. And I was actually very impressed by, it was actually on YouTube. It was just a YouTube video. And I loved the way that it was kind of very bite-sized pieces of learning that I could really relate to. So it was quite simple and to follow, and I was able to go through the whole process myself. But one of the things that I was doing at the same time that I wasn't directed to was actually doing I was following the tutorial, but I was actually doing my own design at the same time. So I'm personally am a learner who likes to do things whilst I'm learning. So one of the things that I would recommend to the people listening is understand your learners, understand the motivations behind why they're doing something, and understand the kind of learning, the learning styles that each of those people have. So that would be my recommendation, to really understand, do the research at the beginning, and understand who your target audience is.
Thanks. That's a great example. And of course, YouTube is the most amazing resource, not least because you can play it on your mobile phone while you are making the recipe or whatever it is, or in my case, trying to put up a set of shelves which came with no instructions. But there's always going to be somebody on YouTube who will have done it, and then you can sit it beside yourself and do your own particular piece of blended learning. That's really interesting, and really it's good to remind ourselves actually about what good actually looks like. I wanted to come on to the actual role of the teacher within learning design, because it's said that teaching largely addresses deficits in motivation and effort, and learning is largely achieved by oneself. In other words, teachers provide the conditions for learning, but all of the hard work has to be done by the individual learner. To what extent can even the best digital learning design replace human intervention? Geoff, do you want to start us off on that one?
Having spent a lot of time working with technology and needs, not in education, employment or training, my personal view is that the technology on its own is never going to be good enough. You have to have teachers and facilitators and educators there and support people who dovetail in and blend with that learning technology. And as you sort of said, that learning is the essence of learning is something that an individual does, but you do need that motivation and self-esteem in order to be able to learn. And lots of those people who are furthest away from the from learning don't have that, and just giving them a piece of learning technology is always going to fail. If you look at some of the kind of corporate training sort of learning objects that you get, like for instance, like health and safety corporate training, but based in using things like articulate storyline. If you gave that kind of, they're not brilliant learning technology anyway. They tick boxes, but if you gave that to people furthest away from the sort of the effective learning, then they would just discard it and forget about it. The teacher needs to be there to sort of to dovetail in with that technology. So when you do your learning design, my personal view is you need to make sure that that you have a very clear idea about what the teacher, the educator, or the facilitator is as part of that teaching learning process. If I can just give you one more example of why the teacher is so important. Pre-COVID, the college that I'm in, we went down the route of formalizing that 20% of the learners' provision would be blended, which meant that they were timetabled and scheduled to do 2 hours a week of blended learning, of e-learning. So that was learning that was designed by the teachers, and the learners did it technically independently, and then obviously that was all monitored through our VLE and whatever. But that was supervised. Now that works really well for like sort of motivated learners at level 3 and A-level learners, but some of those most furthest away, the most difficult ones to learn, level 1 or the sort of the apprentice, sort of the learners who failed at school, they still needed to have a lot of people support behind them, of an encouragement to get them to engage with those learning activities, those e-learning activities. So just to summarize, when you come to do your learning design, you don't just think of the learner, you need to think about how the teacher or the facilitator is working with that technology to make that learning activity successful. Oh, you're on mute, sir.
Yeah. I am indeed, yes. Thanks. That's really interesting, and definitely comes from your experience of working with this quite challenging group of people. Rachel, is that?
Yeah.
You said that conform with your experience?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what Geoff was saying about how you need to kind of coax people who are maybe removed from that motivation. They don't have the same kind of motivation, and that's where the teachers, the facilitators, really come in. one of the questions that I have, and maybe I shouldn't be asking the questions, but one of the questions that I have for everybody who's on the call is about peer-to-peer kind of learning. I mean, we talk about the role of the teacher. That's kind of quite hierarchical, isn't it? And if we're looking to kind of encourage people who maybe have had a bad experience of learning in the past, or are a bit removed from the whole learning experience, maybe incorporating much more of that peer-to-peer learning, trying to facilitate for each other that whole experience, working together to do something and coaching each other. Maybe that's something that could really resonate with some of the people who this funding round is trying to reach.
Thanks. That's interesting. Patrick, do you want to comment on that? I mean, maybe say something about the role of the teacher and the role of peer-to-peer learning.
Yeah, so I didn't think I'd disagree with Geoff, but I am slightly. I'm partly going to disagree. I'm partly going to frantically agree. So I am going to keep coming back rather boringly to the role of the learning designer. So the way I look at the human intervention element, whether it's peer-to-peer or teacher, is it's on a sliding scale. So as Geoff said, there's an awful lot of corporate learning that doesn't involve human beings, and actually some of it's brilliant because it suits the nature of the learning task, right? Down at the other end of the scale, because, you know, if you've got a decent learning design on your team, down at the other end of the scale, you could say, well, actually, do you know what? The technology, as Geoff suggested, is utterly, totally useless without some coaxing, without some nourishing, some support, but it's a sliding scale. And I would kind of provocatively say that digital learning can completely replace human beings, absolutely, in every sense, in the right situation. And in other situations, replacing the human element would be a catastrophe. I can't even say the word catastrophe. It would be a really awful decision, okay? But it's a sliding scale, and the sliding scale is a conscious design decision that the designer makes during the higher level design stage. That's my, so do you know what, that sounded ever so pompous, didn't it? I'm sorry, but I'm kind of, like I say, I'm kind of frantically agreeing and disagreeing at the same time. I hope any of that made any sense.
No, that's great, and that certainly made a lot of sense to me. Let's just we move on. I did want to actually come back to you, Patrick, which was really a kind of continuation of the topic you're already talking about, because the learners the challenge want to target are amongst those furthest from learning. So we want to encourage them to learn vocational skills and increase their confidence. Yeah, I mean, as we know, learning is hard. And I have seen, I'm sure you have too, some digital learning programs which seem to overcompensate by using every type of media going, including video, animations, gaming elements, virtual reality. Can digital learning ever be fun?
Oh goodness, I'm coming at such a stroppy so today, aren't I? Because I'm really not interested in fun. What I'm interested in is designing stuff that changes people by creating an experience that engages them and then moves them from a starting point to finishing point. So I'm going to come back to fun in a minute. I go on endlessly about learning experiences. If you can conjure up the right learning experience for learners, and you've done your investigation and you understand what switches them on, and that indicates that actually they want the most boring documents in the world and no video, no audio, no interaction and no gamings. Well, that's great. Know your learners. That's good design. If, on the other hand, your research indicates that it needs all this other stuff, which sometimes it does, then do that, okay? It's worth saying that example I gave at the beginning, the junior legal folks, I had the evaluation report open earlier on today, and this was the most, frankly, dull, simple, low-tech solution in the world. And in the evaluation report, we have a verbatim, and this is a quote I'm reading off my screen, "Thank you, that was the most fun I ever had." Okay? And the reason that it was fun for him is because it worked. Yeah, he could get the answers quickly. He could feel that he was moving forward. If we'd stopped him with a piece of video, he would have killed us, you know? Yeah, it depends on the research you're doing. Now, I just wanted, there's a little bit of nuance here as well. There's a lot of nuance, but some of the audience might have come across Duolingo, the language app. I'm currently learning German using Duolingo. And I hate these little two-dimensional characters. You know, at the end of every lesson, there's a little two-dimensional parrot that says, "Hey, good job," you know. And it annoys the hell out of me. And I began to wonder why it was there. It's there for timing purposes, I believe. So some canny designer has said, you know what, Patrick, if you keep banging on all the way through this without a timing break, without a pause for reflection, that's a poor learning experience. So in that case, it's a bit of silly, jazzy gaminess, which I don't like, which I'd happily get rid of. But I think it's actually quite an effective structural device in the learning experience.
That's really interesting, because of course Duolingo possesses so many good features about spaced practice and reminders and encouragement and all of that. Geoff, did you want to comment on Patrick's answer?
Well, I pretty much agree with Patrick that designing for fun shouldn't be the secondary thing. Designing for learning should be the sort of primary objective, and it should be enjoyable, maybe not necessarily fun. And as Patrick said, what kind of like media and sort of interactive elements you include in it is all down to design and what the outputs are. I saw a piece of VR the other day, and it was teaching somebody how to use a sink in how to wash their hands, and I thought, well, why don't you just get them to wash their hands in a real sink? I think a low-tech solution like that is much better than sort of trying to sort of use the mouse to move your hand around a virtual sink. So it's all about sort of thinking about the design, but at the back of your head, when you're sort of developing something, you need to sort of think, how is this learning going to be meaningful? I'm using Duolingo as well, and I'm irritated by all those well done, pats on the backs, and the slight gamification of it. It certainly doesn't appeal to me. Maybe it does to a large cohort of Duolingo learners, but gamification can be a bit trite. And you know, unless you're like sort of one of these sort of gaming companies who've got like billions at their disposal, trite gaming isn't necessarily going to make it fun.
Last word to Rachel on this subject.
Yeah, I think it's just in terms of design principles, you know, both Patrick and Geoff have said about knowing your learners, really understanding what they need to achieve, understanding their motivations, understanding how they're going to interact with the learning that you're providing. When are they going to be doing it? Are they going to be doing it after work, in the evenings, things like that? Really understanding your users is crucial to any good design. Just a word of warning, it might be really great to put gamification, badges, you know, ta-das and things like that in it. It might be great from a kind of a stakeholder perspective, but actually we just need to go back to the learners and just make sure that it's doing the job that it's supposed to be doing. There's two balances that you need to have. Why are you doing it? The subject that you're trying to try and teach, and the engagement level. It's a fine balance, but talk to your users, find out what that kind of balance works for them. Ask them to try Duolingo. What do they think of that? You know, kind of get some examples out there in front of people early in your design thinking, and you can gauge how much interaction you're going to need to make it fun. And I mean, we all like a bit of fun now and again, but to me, it's very much like design. People come to say, "Oh, yeah, I want it to look sexy and things like that." But you know, that's different for everybody. I think, you know, just learn from your learners, kind of ask them the questions that they need to know.
Thanks. That's great. Right. Let's just move on. I wanted to actually start with you, Rachel, because I mean, you've been in this game for a while, and technology has changed hugely in the past 20 years, and we've now got access to the world's information through the phone in your pocket. What other technical innovations do you think have made the biggest difference to digital learning?
Okay, I'm showing my age now because I used to help produce CD-ROMs. So that's how long ago I've been in this digital space. I think to answer your question, I think mobile learning is just amazing. I think it's the fact that people have control of when they can and when they actually engage with learning, how they interact with learning, actually moving everything to a mobile first design principle has changed the face of both learning and web design across many different areas. I also think that something that I am very interested in and actually increases the learner experience is smart or AI kind of ability to adjust the learning to meet the needs of the learner. So to change your preferences either explicitly or implicitly to kind of make that learner journey much more effective is a great leap forward. So those are my two areas that I think have made the biggest impact on learning design.
Thanks. Geoff, you've obviously got a couple of technical issues.
Can you hear me okay?
I can, yeah. Let's just, while you get yourself settled back, let's just turn to Patrick on the question of technology. What are the tech innovations that kind of excite you most at the moment in terms of learning?
I love these panel discussions because my answer's just completely changed because of what Rachel said. No, it's not changed completely. It's just it's solidified something in my head. So if you'd asked me 30 years ago, what do you want technology to do? I would have said, can you embed it in the place where people learn, one, and can you tell us what people really need to learn and whether they've learned it or not? Yeah, and that's what's happened. So we're now in a situation, as Rachel says, where you can embed learning where people do the learning through mobile. It's brilliant. My answer was going to be, actually, no, I think this is still my number one thing. You know, in our online lives, we're spied on all the time, aren't we? We go on Facebook, we do Twitter, we Google, and we're feeding all our information to somebody who gets to know us better, okay? And sometimes it feels a little bit oppressive. Now, in a learning environment, that can be a miracle, yeah? Because we're moving away from a situation where we frankly have to guess what people need to learn and whether they've learned it, to a situation of close to certainty. So just talking about a couple of UFI projects, we had one in the prison service that gathered vast amounts of data about what prisoners needed to learn and what they had learned. And it reduced the diagnostic process and the evaluation process from, forgive me, this is off the top of my head, from probably months to seconds, right? And it increased the accuracy of our understanding of what those learners needed and what they had learned by thousands of times. We knew what they needed, we knew what they learned, and that's through data analysis by, I'm using the wrong phrase again, spying on people, by looking at what people are doing, right? Another example, a very recent project looks at gamers. It downloads profile information, the kinds of games that they play and how they perform in those games, and it works out what they've learned. Isn't that amazing? So it looks at problem solving, team leadership, collaboration, really fine diagnostic and assessment data coming straight out of gaming, and they didn't even know. Okay, so the thing, just to round off my kind of ramble, the thing that most excites me is that we're using data to get to truth. Yeah, what is it that people need? What is it that they've learned? And I just think that's incredible.
Geoff, any comments on tech innovations? Rachel's gone for mobile, Patrick's gone for data.
Well, I just had to demonstrate what I believe in because my machine I had the blue screen of death and I've just had to join using my phone. Smartphones are contemporary miracles. None of us knows anything about how they work or only the remotest idea about they work, but they are miraculous. And I think the example you gave, Sarah, about using it to sort of on the job to be able to DI work, how to sort of follow a recipe, recording stuff. Mobile technology, smartphones has got to be my top one. I just think we just haven't begin to explore how they can be used. I use when I'm practicing my trumpet lessons. So I just think that they've come so far since I mean, I did a project with PDA, remember those personal digital assistants, but they had no connectivity out beyond the Wi-Fi network that you got. But now, you know, last night I was out on a boat looking at dolphins, and I could share that dynamically with my daughter who was sitting at home. That's just miraculous. We just haven't gotten there. So that's my first. The second one is something I'm very passionate about, is about voice technology and how computers can now understand what we're saying, particularly when that's backed up by AI and neural network type technology. And Bill Gates predicted that the keyboard would be replaced by voice communications. And he said that in 1997. Well, the keyboard is still with us today, sadly, but it can only be a matter of time before we slowly sort of get used to talking to our computers and listening to what they have to tell us.
I agree. I mean, voice search is just so immensely powerful when you see people who obviously kind of struggle with literacy, but are able to access and find things simply by talking into their mobile phone. And when I first saw that, I was immensely impressed, because it suddenly gives access to all sorts of people who, if they were faced with using a keyboard, simply would not have access. I'm aware that we've got very few questions from the audience. So I'll just encourage anybody who wants to ask questions to our fantastic panel to put them in the chat. So while you have a think about that, I just wanted to come on to a couple of follow-ups to the one about technology, which is, should we, for a long time, this phrase digital natives, which I think is a bit now old hat, was kicked around. Should we assume that younger people are more at ease with digital innovations?
Is that a question to the panel?
That's a question to anybody who wants to ask it, who wants to answer it. When you're designing, when you're thinking about the learning design, do you make a difference according to the age of your learning audience? Patrick?
I would say yes, but check it. Yeah, your entry point is going to be different, but check it really carefully. I can think of, and do you know what, sort of folks my age, what I'm finding is I'm doing more U-turns in the last sort of 5 years or so in terms of design, because I'm having to check more. You know, maybe I'm hitting my sell by date, I don't know, but yes, make certain assumptions, because you always have to make certain assumptions about your learner group anyway, but check, for goodness sake. And also, I'm just on the edges of just to turn the question upside down, of a project for really pretty old folks in the 70s and 80s. And frankly, some of their use of technology is brilliant. Yeah, they're much more dispersed and much more fragmented in them. The range of expert to novice is much wider. But you have to start with some kind of assumption, but for goodness sake, check them.
I would say that I would agree with that, particularly with young people. Don't assume that they're all sort of techno whiz kids and that they, you know, that their first language is just their thumbs. A lot of what young people do is quite trivial in terms of computing and using of technology. It's not necessarily sophisticated, apart from sort of Snapchat and stuff. So you do need to be very clear, you know, so understand. I think, as Rachel was saying, you need to understand your learners very carefully. So you need to understand, if it's talking about young people, then, you know, don't group them all together.
Thanks. Say one more thing about this. Maybe Rachel might comment. Interface design is a key thing that young folks vary enormously on. So you'll find the techies, the cliches. Now, forgive me, I'm wandering into dangerous cliche here. The nerdy boy can use a mouse. A lot of people can't. A very specific profile of young person will use a trackpad. A number of young folks won't. Everyone can do a touchscreen on a mobile phone, and so on and so on. Check really carefully about interface devices.
I kind of echo what Patrick and Geoff said. Do that user research at the beginning. Yes, you do need to make assumptions. They're hypotheses. You kind of go with an assumption. You test those hypotheses with your users. You can create personas. You can have a different number of personas for an age group, whether they be old or young. But you really need to be able to differentiate between their needs, their actual user needs. And I think, we all make assumptions that all Gen Z can use digital devices. They're great whizzes, but actually I have found in the research that I've been doing is that actually some of them are quite nervous. They need some support. They might be very good at Snapchat, they might be very good at YouTube, but actually if you put them in front of a document download or upload situation, they're completely thrown by that. So do check with your users what their needs are and what their level of interaction style is.
Thanks, Rachel. Tara in Durham in the audience wanted to make a comment on the last question. Tara, do you want to share your audio and video and comment to all of us? Here she comes. Hello, Tara. Hi.
Hiya.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Welcome. What's your comment? Hello.
No, it was the question that you asked. It was just it's very. I'm conscious that we sometimes we automatically think because we've got, say, 16+ age learners and that they use personal devices 24/7, 365 days a year, that they know how to use the systems and the technologies that we use in a learning environment, and it's not always the case. So I frequently get tutors commenting to me that, oh yeah, they know how to work the smartphone and go on Twitter and well, it's not Twitter anymore, it's something else. I think Triller is one that's coming up, but they don't know how to copy a URL from a website and pop it into a document. It's those types of things that we use in the workplace, and sometimes they're not transferable, and they will only learn those skills in a learning environment. Anyway, that was it really.
No, thanks, Tara. That's really interesting, and that certainly echoes what Rachel was saying about actually really delving into what your learners or your potential learners actually can do, as opposed to making assumptions. Geoff or Patrick, did you want to make any comments on what Tara's just said?
I think I agree with what Tara was saying, is that as I said, put into the chat there, almost all our learners have got really nice smartphones, but they use them for fairly limited purposes, and the kind of operations that Tara was talking about sort of doing more complex things, about sharing documents or sort of doing joint editing of a document and some of those more sophisticated things. They don't necessarily have those. You can't assume that they have them.
Thanks. That's useful. I wanted to just really kind of we're quite near the end of that. I just wanted to ask a final question, which is really about what your final words of advice are, because this challenge is all about improving learning confidence and motivation to learn vocational skills. And we expect that some of our applicants will have a really deep understanding of the barriers their learners face, but less understanding, so they understand the audience, but they'll have less understanding of how learning design can help. And as you're professionals in this field, what advice would you give someone approaching such a project for the first time? So will I ask you that first, Geoff?
Well, I think Rachel's already talked about this, about using personas and vignettes, and work your way through the you know, almost like scripting out how that technology is going to be used and how it's going to work, and what might be the pitfalls, and look at it from a human perspective and describe that story before you then go on and sort of specify that you're going to develop in Java and you're going to be using this Firebase back sort of underpinning sort of technology kind of thing.
Okay, so start with the learners. Patrick, what would your advice be to somebody starting this for the very first time?
The thing that I've seen go wrong most often is a confusion between what you might call high-level design and low-level design. In other words, what's the overall concept? What's the strategy? What's the thing that's going to change the person from point A to point B? What I've seen many, many times, very painfully, is people go straight to the low level, and like Geoff says, they start talking about technology. They start saying, how many quizzes are we going to have? Is it going to be blue or red? You know, they go low level too soon. And they don't think enough about the overall experience, forgive me, I'm talking about experience again, that is going to change the people from where they are to where you want them to be. And until you're really solid about what that high concept is, what that high level design is, what that experience is going to be, don't do anything else, is my top tip.
Yeah, I'm nodding there, because you need that vision, don't you? You need that vision for the whole team to get behind, and also to really, in a nutshell, have a problem statement that you're trying to solve. So that's true of any kind of design, but definitely in learning design. Have that key principle, and then start digging into the actual design level at the lower level. To kind of echo what Geoff and Patrick have said, it's great understanding your learners at the beginning, having a clear picture of what their needs and their motivations are, essential. Then my advice to anybody who's undertaking a project is to test often. You know, undertake research. It doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to be really well, you know, you don't have to kind of go mad with it, but do it often, because it validates what you're doing, and you can do those U-turns that Patrick was talking about. You can kind of adjust things along that project timeline, but don't be scared to test as much as possible, because it will make you motivated to keep going on with your project as well. But knowing that you're hitting the spot with your learners is essential. Mute, Sarah, you're on.
Myself again. Right, let me just start again. Thanks. I'd just like to say, Rachel, I think that was a brilliant last piece of advice and really useful. So just about run out of time. So I'd just like to thank everyone for joining us today, and thanks to our panel for some excellent insights. So updates on the fund will be sent to you via the UFI community newsletter, which you signed up for when you registered for this workshop. You can also follow us on social media. We'll send you an email including a link to the video of the discussion, and we'll also be putting a copy of this discussion on our website. And for those for whom TLDR summarizes how they learn, there'll be a summary of the main points. We hope you find this useful. If you could take a few minutes to provide us with some feedback, that would be appreciated. A link to the survey is dropped in the chat. And finally, I'd really like to thank everyone for taking part. Thanks to our panel, Patrick Dunn, Rachel Smith, and Geoff Elliott. And thank you to you, the audience. Good luck with your application to the VocTech Challenge Fund. Remember, applications close at 5 o'clock on the 29th of July. Bye, everybody.